And we shall begin. I'm just going to quickly introduce our speakers today, many of whom you will know. So we've got Liz Wright here today with us, who is a welfarist, and I'll get Liz to explain what she means by that. And she's authored 10 books on keeping poultry. She's the editor of Smallholder magazine. Is that correct, Liz? I seem to remember.
Yeah, Smallholder and Practical Poultry.
Right. And has kept chickens herself for many, many years. And yeah, so we're lucky to have Liz here today to discuss chicken welfare and some of the myths surrounding chickens. We've also got Jane Howorth. Jane, I hope I pronounced your surname correctly. Apologies if I didn't. Jane started to rehome hens on a large scale in October 2003 and set up the first UK's registered charity for chickens, the British Hen Welfare Trust, in April 2005. And she's now rehomed over 800,000 hens as pets. Yes, so we are in good hands. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask either Liz or Jane, after their little presentations, pop them in the chat and then we'll come to them at the end. So if I can get you all to mute yourselves now, I am going to hand over to Liz.
Right, it's really lovely to be here, and most of my friends dread me talking about chickens. In fact, they really regret asking me anything at all, because about 3 hours later, they're looking extraordinarily bored. If you feel at all bored, you can stare into the background and count the cats, because I have about 20 in total. And I think at least 6 of them are draped around this room, even as we speak. I'm not going to talk very much about keeping chickens yourselves. This is really born out of my irritation every single Christmas when somebody talks about cooking a capon. And this irritates me so much. I don't know why, actually, except that it shows a real lack of grasp about the poultry industry and chicken welfare. I think the second irritating thing is when I hear that people are going to get Rhode Island Reds because they're the best layers and you're going to feed them on scraps because that's what they did during the war. We've come a long, long way since the war in the poultry industry. Some of it good, quite a lot of it not so good. So let's start with capons. Capons, as I'm sure you all know, are basically a neutered cockerel. The cockerel keeps his sexual tackle inside him. So you can understand that to remove any testes from a cockerel is going to be an extraordinarily painful experience for a small chick. And that was banned quite early on, but it was replaced by chemical castration, which is neither good for the bird nor for us. So the whole thing was banned. I'm not quite sure exactly the date, but really back in the 60s. So capons haven't been around for a long time. When people talk about a capon, what they mean is a large hybrid meat bird. They often also refer to these birds as cockerels, which is also not true. They're not cockerels. They are both sexes, and they're a large hybrid meat bird. And hybrid meat birds come in a variety of breeds, shapes, sizes, but they have one thing in common. They all need to put weight on very quickly and be ready in the shortest possible time. So with every hybrid meat bird, then you've got issues straight away, because once those birds go over around about 6-7 weeks, and sometimes before, they often have severe weakness in their legs that simply can't support the large frame. A hybrid meat bird needs to be able to convert food to flesh and to be able to not have, or to have the least amount of food it possibly can in order to convert to flesh, because obviously when you're rearing poultry, feed costs are one of the highest costs you're going to have. Your sheds, etc., are a standing cost. They're going to be used for load after load of birds, but your variable cost, the feed, is the one that you can do something about with your margins. So they need to be able to convert that very, very efficiently. And this is what they do. They put weight on very quickly, and about 7 weeks, most of them are slaughtered for the most of the chicken that we will see in the supermarkets. There's not really, I would think the percentage of birds that are not hybrid meat birds on sale commercially would be very low, infinitesimal, in fact. So your hybrids are male and females. Often the bigger ones are called capons or cockerels and appear at Christmas, but they are in fact still the hybrid bird, and they're both sexes. There is an interesting welfare issue with the meat bird that the Humane Slaughter Association and Sam asked me if I wanted to mention any websites, and I forgot this one, but I think it's going to be in the newsletter. The Humane Slaughter Association is your one-stop shop as a food writer for anything that you need to know about slaughter. They are not, how can I put this? They're not a vegan vegetarian organisation. They're a practical meat-based organisation, but they are campaigning for the welfare of all animals beyond the farm gate. And to do this, you have to know an awful lot about handling and slaughter. I wouldn't say that any of them are actually vegan or vegetarian. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to make the lives of animals at the time of slaughter as good as it possibly could be. And so one of the issues that they campaign on is the breeding of hybrid meat birds. Because if you are going to breed the next generation, they have to be able to mate, and also you have to keep them alive. If you've got a bird who puts on an enormous amount of weight and has a huge appetite, which is exactly what you want for a meat bird, then keeping it alive is quite difficult because they do suffer from heart failure, and keeping it on its legs is quite difficult. So you therefore may have to restrict the feed. This in itself is a welfare issue because birds are bred to eat a prodigious amount of feed to put the weight on. So this is one of the issues you might like to look up on their site. They've done quite a lot of work on that one. And to me, it highlights the issues of food and producing any animals for food. Whatever we produce, there's often sort of hidden issues, as we shall see. With the laying birds, which Jane's going to talk about in a lot more detail, they obviously have their own issues when it comes to breeding. So we want the opposite in a laying bird. We want a bird that's going to use as little food as possible, because that's a variable cost, and produce as many eggs as possible with as little food as possible. And that particular bird therefore has to have a very light frame. We don't want a big meaty frame on a laying bird, or she's going to consume too much food. So we want a very lightweight bird. So these therefore are absolutely useless for meat. Absolutely useless. Obviously we have to do something with what they call spent hens, which means the ones that are no longer required for laying, and Jane can talk more about that. But we don't want any extra ones. So all the male chicks are killed at day old in the laying industry. They are all killed. They are either gassed or minced. In Europe, they've just brought in some legislation to regulate this, and there is a really encouraging development that these eggs can be sexed as an egg, which then means that we don't have to kill as day old. You can imagine that apart from anything else, it's quite distressing for a lot of the workers. It's not something you'd want to do, really, is it? Again, interestingly, this throws up some interesting welfare in that this makes a lot of difference in the life of something who's only going to live for about 24 hours, at what point you kill it. So what you don't want is to be put in a box and left in a draft for the day with no food and no water. So improving what life they have for that bird is quite important. The amount of gas you're going to use, how long you leave it around, how often you kill, etc., etc. I'd never ever thought of that until the HSA did quite a lot of research on it. In the old days, not always so good, but in the old days we had things called utility breeds, and utility breeds did both. they had milk and, sorry, that's the cow. They had eggs and meat. We had utility breeds throughout, to be honest, during pre-war and wartime, because it's a very economical way to have a breed that does two things. But these days, the hybrids came along and they so outlaid the utility breeds that they really ceased to exist. So your Rhodie, your light Sussex, that type of thing could also be developed into a decent sized cockerel. But now they cannot compete with the meat hybrid or with the laying hybrid. There's some interest in reviving the utility breeds. I doubt that it's ever going to be commercial. There may be some farm shops that do them, but the problem with utility breeds is that they were egg trialed regularly. They were egg tested, so that means that they did numerous counting of how many eggs each bird was laying, so that they ended up with the best laying strains, and you could buy the best laying strains and increase your flock. A cockerel was so valuable in the 40s that you could really sort of practically keep your farm off a cockerel that comes from a high egg laying strain. We've lost all of these strains. It pains me to say. I find this so sad. We've lost all of these strains and nearly all the gentlemen that put so much effort into them. At the same time, they used to show these birds at exhibitions as well, and do the egg trials at the exhibitions. They used to have an interesting thing called a trap nest, which is what it says on the label. So birdie would trot into the nest, the door would close behind her, and then they would be able to work out exactly how many eggs each bird laid. Obviously, can you imagine the labor in that? It's a very labor intensive thing, and really only the enthusiasts do it these days. There has been some move to try and recreate the utility breeds. At the moment, it had a bit of resurgence in about the 80s, but at the moment it's all a bit...
You know about chickens and eggs for the mayonnaise?
So, sorry, I've just forgotten where I was. It's all gone a bit flat. It's all gone a bit flat at the moment. And the birds that you buy as a Rhode Island Red or a light Sussex, we have no idea of what number of eggs or how good they are at meat conversion anymore, because they're mainly now judged on looks. So it's now gone all to the exhibition side, and it doesn't really matter how many eggs they produce as long as they fulfill every standard. The Poultry Club lay down a standard for each and every pure breed, of which there are quite literally hundreds, and none of them include the number of eggs that they lay. They're all on things like colour, evenness of colour, what the comb looks like, etc. So not much use if you're trying to produce anything commercially. So that's really an overview of the industry where we are. So what is a hybrid? A hybrid is not genetically modified in the scientific sense of the word. It's a number of different breeds that have been developed, mated together, and it's still happening. They all come from purebreds originally, which is why maintaining the purebreds is so important to the poultry industry, as you never know which purebred you're going to need. So when the free range industry took off, they needed a much tougher type laying hen. They needed one that would live outside, one that would go out and scratch, one that would put up with cold. And one of the breeds that was developed was the Black Rock, which was developed up in Scotland, where things are harsh, and that became very much the bedrock of free range flocks at that time. If you wanted a blue egg layer, we have Aracanas, a purebred, but if you want one to lay a lot, then you're going to try and develop that into a hybrid that lays a larger number of blue eggs. A brown egg layer, at the moment we have the Moran and the Welsh Summers, whose eggs are so beautiful, but if you want it on a commercial scale, you need to mix that with something so that you've got a larger number of eggs, maybe slightly less brown, but you are getting an increased number of eggs. A lot of the names that you hear or you see in the supermarkets are not purebreds. They are in fact hybrids. Some of them have got some very pretty names like Bluebell or things like that, but they are in fact hybrids. Much confusion in the novice poultry industry over what they're actually buying. You know, like, I've bought a Bluebell, where can I show it? Well, you can't, because you've actually bought a hybrid. So there's quite a lot of confusion over that, because it seems to me that we just can't get away from the war when we talk about keeping free range poultry. One thing I will say, another welfare thing, is if you do buy hybrid hens as your layers, you really do need to give them a proper balanced diet, not scraps. They're not designed to eat scraps. They're not designed to forage wildly for all their food. They're designed to have a good balanced diet. And we spend a lot of time trying to get that across to people who write into the magazine and say, oh, my chicken's not laying and it said it was point of lay, and I give it scraps. And no, you need to give it a proper balanced diet. Otherwise, she won't be able to lay eggs. So the free range, and obviously Jane will speak more about this, but the free range industry in this country has increased, and that brings its own set of welfare issues as well. When I said it wasn't all good in the 30s and 40s, there was disease after disease spread through all the poultry flocks almost unchecked. It was a real problem, and some of the free range flocks were not beautifully kept. So we have to balance that up. But the 60s always strike me as quite a harsh time, because we went from kind of market gardening type farming to this very intensive, and now we're reining back from that a bit and looking much more at what we eat. Which brings me to chlorinated chicken. Why do I hate chlorinated chicken so much? Because if you have to chlorinate chicken, you're keeping it in filth. That's as easy as it comes. If you're having to do that to your meat chicken before you dare put it on the shelves, then you're keeping it in conditions that we simply would not accept in this country. And that's why I hate it so much. I'll just have a very quick look at the avian flu. I do know really boringly large amounts about avian flu, but the one thing that I think you should all bear in mind is that avian flu is endemic in many countries, and our problems arise as it gets closer and closer to us. Why do we worry about it so much? Because there is a possibility it can be transmitted to humans, as has recently happened in Russia. And we're even more worried. And you can correct me on this, Jane, if you want, but I don't think there's been any case yet of avian flu contracted from a chicken passing from human to human. But this is always our fear. And this is why they take avian flu so seriously. Avian flu treatment is very harsh. You cull out all the affected birds and anything in a radius around them. When we had it really badly several years ago, this really upset everybody with purebred poultry, because you could be within a few miles of a battery or a meat producing poultry unit, and you would have to kill all of your domestic poultry. And with purebred poultry, some people had been developing the breeding for years and years and years, and they stood to lose all of their life's work. So this was a real issue. You can vaccinate against avian flu, but it tends to mask the issue. So at the moment, they're not keen to do so. Migrating birds do carry avian flu, but not as much as the press always seems to think. It's one of the transmission routes, but other transmission routes over the years have been dirty lorry wheels, people moving from country to country, food. So it's not only, I think the poor old migrating birds get the blame for a lot of it, but much of the transmission has been down to human error and human intervention. At the moment, we're under a lockdown for all poultry in this country until about the middle of April. In fact, they'll probably come out about the same time we do. And this means that you've got to keep your birds in, and you've got to keep migrating or any type of bird out. So they've got to be all fenced in with wire, netting, whatever people think. Particular issue for ducks, because they're water-based, and keeping ducks in is not good. And geese have a bit of a derogation, and you can not keep them in if it's a complete welfare issue. And finally, I think I'm running off now, aren't I? Finally, we do import a lot of meat from other countries into the supermarkets, which seems strange to me, but we do, including from Brazil. And of course, we import from countries whose welfare standards are not as high as ours are. So we don't need any more chlorinated chicken. Thank you very much. with the avian flu, just one other tiny thing, with the free range poultry industry, have got a derogation that even if they're having to keep their birds inside, they can still classify as free range, because it really isn't their fault that they've had to keep their birds in. This is due to our current outbreak of avian flu. There's nothing they can do about it, and they can't let them out any time before we can. I haven't talked at all about keeping chickens. There's plenty of books, I've written loads of them, but I would say do plenty of research and decide exactly what it is you want, whether you want pretty hens that don't lay much, hybrid hens that lay a lot, or something in between that's a moderate layer and reasonably attractive to look at. I think there are so many breeds of chicken that you really should be able to get the one that suits you. And my last bit of advice is, whenever you buy books saying keeping poultry in the garden, you can have a garden or you can have chicken, but you can't really have both. Not without protecting some of your nice little plants anyway. Some chickens are a bit more scratchy than others, but they all love a jolly good scratch. And this is what, when they're kept in caged areas, they so lack. So I'm going to hand over to Jane now. Is that okay?
That was lovely, Liz. Thank you. Over to you, Jane. Don't forget to unmute yourself. Brilliant.
I've just unmuted. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And thank you so much for inviting me. What a great opportunity for me to get in front of some actually quite influential people. I'm going to talk on three things, just going to give you a little bit of an outline of why I set up the charity. Tiny bit on the different sectors, because I expect everybody is aware of the difference between cage and organic, etc. And then I'm going to talk about size matters, because that's the one that particularly interests me, and that actually I think everybody attending today could make a difference to hen welfare. So just going back to the charity, I've always loved animals, saw a programme back in the 90s called Panorama down on the factory farm. They showed all different animals, and it was the chickens that particularly got me. It was the chickens in cages for a year, never saw daylight or sunshine or touched ground, grass, and then they went to slaughter. So fast forward till I was in my sort of early 30s, I moved to Devon and had space and decided to get some chickens. So I trawled a few lanes. I found a battery farmer. He very kindly let me take some of his birds. I went for 12 and was so sort of shocked at what I saw. I ended up with about 36. And from that, I just built relationship with chickens, realized what great little creatures they are. They're cats and dogs with feathers, essentially. And so in 2003, I decided I was going to do something much more concrete, and I decided to start rehoming these birds, as Liz said, called spent hens. So they were just going to slaughter, had very little value. Their value is anything between 0 pence to 20 pence to a farmer at the point of slaughter. So in 2003, I started rehoming as an individual. And then in 2005, I actually set up the charity because I realized really quickly that people were as interested in helping these little birds as I was. So fast forward, and as Sam has said, we have now helped over 810,000 hens. They've all been saved from slaughter, and the vast majority end up as family pets. The reason that I wanted to actually grow the rehoming side of what I do is because the hens themselves make the most wonderful educational tools. And I've got little flocks of typically between 4 and 6 birds going off to live as family pets in back gardens. And the educational spread from those birds, which is very positive to see them blossom and turn from sort of bewildered birds to beautiful birds, is just so powerful, because the families that adopt them, or people that adopt them, tell their neighbours, their work colleagues, their friends, and that's how it's all rolled, really. We have homed on average 60,000 birds every year, and that's on average about 12,000 adoptions a year. So the average flock size is about 5 birds. I'm so lucky, we've got over 1,000 volunteers. We're mainly volunteer led. There's about 15 staff. And although I started out very much to sort of raise awareness of caged hens, I've always done it with a very positive stance, and also very keen to make sure that we are supportive of the British egg industry, because although, you know, I want to see hens out of cages and out in fields, I very much want to support the industry, because actually we do have some good welfare here, and a lot of farmers do it very well and want to do it well. So it's always important to me that we had a very positive attitude towards the farmers that we work with. So just giving you an update on the charity, we started out as a rehoming organisation, but actually such is our growth that we are now looking at hens as therapy. We're just about to start a 2-year project where we're looking at hens helping people rather than people helping hens. So for example, we've got chickens in quite a few prisons around the country, in a handful of prisons. And the anecdotal feedback that we get from that it's mind-blowing. It's just so fantastic how the hens have an ability to help people with anger management. They give people that are in long term a sense of purpose. They're even helping people learn to read and write because they're suddenly interested in keeping a diary on chickens. So we also know that they're very powerful in the mental health sector. So children with autism, we've had plenty of parents sort of feed back to us that the chickens make a fantastic conduit for communication with anyone suffering with mental health issues. One other gorgeous story was a chap in his 50s who had never been able to have a job, lived with his sister because of mental health issues. He adopted some chickens, which not only gave him the purpose, but it gave him, for the first time in his life, an income. And he was able, for the first time in his life, to actually buy his own t-shirts online, which I just think is lovely. So the charity has grown from just rehoming. We're now looking at hens as therapy. And also we're working with the University of Nottingham on a 5-week course, which is designed to better educate vets on chickens, because believe it or not, they don't know how to treat or diagnose and treat a single pet hen. They might know how to treat a commercial flock of 10,000. But as we're creating more and more of these birds as pets, there is an increasing demand for treatments for pet hens. So that's another big piece of work that we're doing. It's taken over my life, but I absolutely love it. I'll just move on now to the industry. I think probably everybody I'm speaking to is well aware that there are different sort of sectors. So 0 on an egg equals organic. They're the birds that have the best time at the moment. They have access outdoors during daylight hours. They have access to organic feed, and their pasture is organic. And also there are fewer hens per square metre under soil association rules. So they have the high life, if you like. The number 1 on an egg denotes free range. That sector has grown massively. When I started the charity, it was about just over 30% of birds were free range. It's now over 60% of birds free ranging. And I'll come on to that a little bit later. So we're definitely on the rise. The industry is investing heavily, and free range has remained strong even through recession. So there's no doubt that, you know, I think partly it's our work, partly other organisations, that messaging on free range is really getting across. And actually, I must point out here that, you know, also food writers and chefs are key in this, because all the recipes make reference to free range eggs. It's amazing. You've so helped to make the case for free range. Number 2 on an egg equals barn, and barn hens are kept loose in a large, it's not necessarily a pretty barn, but in a unit. But the birds have ability to move around and perform most of their natural behaviours. So a well-run barn system can offer a bird quite a natural environment. Obviously, they're not allowed to go outside in a barn. Then the low and the cheap, low welfare, cheap egg is the number 3, which is the colony stroke enriched eggs. And these eggs they came about post-war because we all wanted cheap food as plentifully as possible. Battery cages, which were a very, very cruel way of keeping chickens. It was 4 birds in the size of what I can only sort of describe to you as a large cat basket, for a year. They couldn't stretch their wings, they couldn't flap, they certainly couldn't scratch. They were entirely surrounded by wire, never saw daylight. It was incredibly unpleasant, and these are quite intelligent little birds. So they've now been replaced in 2012 by what's called enriched or colony cages. They're still cages, they still have no floor, they're still wire floor, so they're surrounded by wire. But the birds can walk from one end of the cage to the other, they can stretch and flap, they can interact or get away from each other a little bit more. They even have a nesting area. So it's a move in the right direction. But the charity's objective is to see all birds outside free ranging. So that's our main incentive. Interestingly, the market for the colony eggs at the moment has plummeted. And that's because of COVID and the demand for eggs in the leisure sector, so restaurants, etc., has plummeted, and also food processing is where the vast majority of the colony eggs now go. So it's really interesting from my perspective. The farm industry was asked to invest hugely in 2012 in these enriched cages. They actually invested 400 million, and 9 years later, the demand for colony eggs is really, really dropping. And now farmers that's why they're investing in free range, which is fantastic news. They're even leapfrogging the barn sector because they are so nervous that supermarkets and consumers will turn their backs on the barn eggs. And I'm glad to hear it, because what we want to see is the growth in small flock free range hens that have the most natural life they can possibly be given. So that's just giving you a brief overview of how people are buying eggs at the moment. Supermarkets by 2025 have mostly pledged to go entirely free range or cage free. Cage free means barn. It does not mean free outside. And that's another aspect that the charity will be focusing on as a campaign in the very near future, actually, because there is confusion amongst consumers. Consumers automatically think that cage free means the bird is outside, and it's not so. Free range and organic mean the birds are outside. The other piece that I wanted to come on to is size matters. And we are just absolutely drip fed from such an early age that big is best. And if there's 2 slices of cake, who doesn't go for the biggest? And the same with everything. And we all see that size equals good value, and it's the same for eggs. And this is proving to be, and has been, a huge issue for the industry for some time. And we as a charity will always collaborate and work with the industry where we have common ground. And this is one such area. So to take it back to a young bird will go into her laying environment, and that can be a cage, a barn, free range or organic. She will go in at roughly 16 to 17 weeks old. That's called point of lay. When she first starts laying eggs, she lays very small eggs. The industry cannot sell those small eggs to supermarkets because consumers apparently don't want them. In my view, that's because supermarkets have led us down the path of believing that big eggs are better. And this is where you can come in, because actually you have so much power to change this. I'll explain first, though, why it's better for everyone. So I'm not going to put the hen first. I'm going to say the farmer first. At the moment, the farmer, with the small eggs that are laid by these young birds who are in the peak of their health, they have to cascade down into the processed sector as liquid egg, or generally they're called seconds. So they do not have the same value as the large eggs. And roughly just under 50% of eggs in the UK at the moment are large eggs. And because the demand is so high for large eggs, the industry is constantly trying to genetically breed birds that will cope with laying bigger eggs. Now, onto the hen, it's pretty obvious why it's a welfare issue for the hen. If a hen is forced to pop out a huge egg on a daily basis, not only is that an ouch factor for her, but it actually can lead to increased prolapsing, and that is quite a common issue within the industry. So it's for no real issue for us as consumers. We could switch our thinking to using 2 small eggs or a medium egg instead of a large egg, and consumers would. I'm coming on to food writers in a minute, because you actually hold such a key to this, but consumers are also under some illusion that, you know, if they get a big egg, they get a big yolk. They don't. Very often, 9 times out of 10, the yolk size in a small egg will be the same as the yolk size in the large egg. And for most people, you know, the yolk is the yummy bit. The white is just the bit you've got to use up because you don't want to waste it. So it's everybody wins. Consumers would get more yolk for their buck. The farmers would get more bucks for their small eggs. And, you know, primarily for me, of course, the hen would have less pressure put on her to lay a large egg on a daily basis. When they are forced to lay large eggs all the time, that they have to input so much of their own calcium, which is why feed is you know, within the commercial sector is so important. And as the bird gets older, they have to increase the levels of calcium in order to keep up, and so that the hen can actually produce the shell that goes around that large egg. When you use a large egg, also, no matter if it's fresh, very often the egg white will be a bit watery. I wish I sort of I wish I had some shop bought eggs here, because if I cracked a just bought shop egg on a plate, the white would just run across the plate. If I cracked one of the eggs that I've got in my kitchen at the moment, you would see a really pert little yolk sticking up on top high of a very tight gelatinous white around the yolk. And it's, again, there are so many reasons why small is beautiful and big is not. So every time food writers, you know, you refer to free range eggs, you've done a fantastic job. Please, can we start saying 2 small eggs or 1 medium egg? I noted one of the messages was, you know, you weigh eggs when you do cakes, etc. And I think the alchemy of baking a cake is probably the one area where there needs to be real, you know, a case for the egg quantity needs to be right. But it's possible. It's really possible. I know the egg industry were itching for me to forward Yorkshire pudding recipe, which uses 4 eggs regardless of size, and they've tested it and just said whatever the number of eggs you use, whatever the size of eggs, I beg your pardon, you use, you get the same fantastic results. I've just seen one of the messages coming in about the egg spreading on the plate relating to age. That is true to a degree. But actually, when you have these commercial birds that are the more into their life cycle they get, the bigger the eggs become and the more tired they become. And actually, I've had lots of hens in my home, or in my hen house, I should say, that have just come out from a farm environment, and they still pop out eggs. It can be a bruised hen off its legs, unable to stand up, but it'll still pop out a hen. So it's, if I crack that fresh egg that it's just laid and it's a really large egg, there's still a tendency for that white to be actually quite thin and watery because it's knackered. Mixed weight eggs are the perfect solution for all of us. And I can see there's some chat going on with that. Waitrose, the Co-op, and I think there's one of them, I can't remember which one it is, are just beginning to introduce mixed weight eggs. This is better for the farmer because he doesn't lose money on his small eggs. It's better for the hen because we're only asking to her to do what comes naturally. But when you look at the bigger picture, there is, you know, it's a small fraction of the market at the moment. This take up on mixed weight eggs is tiny. And that's where you can, you know, if we start changing how we write about eggs, you literally can indirectly influence hen welfare. And it'd be fantastic. So I think that's pretty much me covering the points that I wanted to cover. A couple of other things, actually. Liz referred to the broiler breeders, and because I'm passionate about chickens, and if you haven't had them, you should have them, because they're just amazing creatures to have. We get 1 or 2 flocks of broiler breeder layers every year. These are the little birds that lay the eggs that then grow into our roast dinners. So they are very different to a laying bird, as Lynn said. They're very short and dumpy and terribly sweet-natured little birds. And they are in usually a closed barn environment. And the cockerels that are with them, because, as Liz said, it's all about size. Everybody wants everything on the breast. Nobody wants the leg meat and the bits and pieces. The cockerels are probably 4-5 times the size and weight of the little broiler breeder hens. And when I go in and we collect those birds before they were obviously meant to go to slaughter, they are sad. It's quite sad, because most of them come out with completely bowed legs, where they have been mounted daily, every day, for their entire year life cycle. And yeah, it's hard. It's actually quite upsetting. And it's this is the meat side of things. It's not what the charity is about. That I made a very, very definite decision when I started the charity. I wanted to focus on egg layers, because the egg laying hens have to endure, if they're in a cage, that life for a year. Whereas, as Liz said, the broiler birds only have a very, very short lifespan. So I was determined just to focus on the one. But these little broiler breeders, I just wanted to mention it because it has come up a couple of times. And very sweet birds. And of course the cockerels at the end of it are deemed not good enough for a second season, so they're all necked and they're got rid of. I think that's me done.
Thank you. Sorry, I muted myself. I'm too busy keeping track of the questions. Thank you very much for that, both of you. Fascinating. I keep chickens myself, and there was plenty there that I didn't know already. So, right. So I'm going to go through the questions. The first one was from Demet. Demet, I apologise if that is a mispronunciation of your name. Please correct me if that is incorrect, but you had a question regarding the future of ethical eggs.
You want me to repeat it?
Yes, please, if you wouldn't mind, that would be lovely, because it was a way back at the
word, and you pronounced it perfectly fine. Thank you, Sam. I was wondering if free-range eggs are the highest where we can go now in terms of ethicality of eating eggs, or would pasteurized hen eggs take their place? What's the future looking like? What's the right thing to do for us to promote, and as writers, but also maybe push the industry in that direction, and wish for as consumers, I suppose?
I would definitely say that free range and organic are the way to go. And what we're focusing on as a charity is encouraging small flocks. And by small flock, I mean 4,000 or less. So a free range flock can be anything up to 16,000. And it sort of stands to reason that it is a generalization, but generally the smaller the flock, the higher the welfare. And also that the organic birds are given more space per bird. So again, that is increasing their welfare generally.
So
okay.
pasture.
Pasteurized, you're talking about the liquid egg side of it there, really?
No, pasture. I don't know if my pronunciation.
Okay, I'm with you. Yeah. So pasture meaning free ranging. Yes, absolutely. So for example, sorry, you broke up a bit there.
I'm sorry. I think pasture raised hens that have more space, don't they? Like
yes, they do.
Free range hens.
That's right. And actually you can go one further, because they have what's called range enrichment. So range enrichment on pasture or in paddocks or fields can be things like an upturned farm vehicle, or it can be a woodland area. Birds naturally will struggle to go into open territory because they fear overhead predation and also ground predation. So range enrichment, it can be shrubbery, so that they can get in and hide. They'll create dust bath areas. So the more range enrichment they have, the better it is. Sainsbury's bought out the woodland eggs, I think it's called, and they insist on hens having woodland area within their free range pasture. So again, that's the ideal environment for birds to live, a more natural life, really. Be able to do what comes naturally. And farmers are realizing slowly that actually by investing in things like trees and cover, that increases productivity. But it's like with anything, this takes time to sort of filter through. So I think the more that Woodland Trust, thank you, yeah. So I think the more that this sort of comes through from you as food writers, the more it will, seep into the consumer's psyche that's the way to go in terms of welfare.
Because a chicken is in fact a jungle fowl, isn't it, Jane?
Yeah. Yes.
They originate from the jungle. They all do. There's not an English chicken. They all came from the jungle originally.
That's right.
Way for them to live. On the subject of sourcing eggs, I think it's important to just be a little bit careful with the sort of unregulated side of eggs. So sometimes you'll go to a producer on the side of the road. You do need to know how they keep their chickens. Just because they've got a nice farm gate and a few egg boxes doesn't mean that their hens are any better off than the ones in a cage situation in some people's cases. You need to ask how they're kept. Being small, in my experience, doesn't always make you...
No, I that's why I said it is a generalization.
Yeah, no, Jane's quite right, but I'm
yeah.
talking about my end as a smallholder. Some smallholders' chickens could be kept in a much better way, and there's some egg housing. When you look at the houses that people sell for 6 hens, I'm like, 6 hens? What, overnight? Oh, no, it's got to run. No, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. You need as much run as you can give them. I'm talking very small numbers here.
So you had a question regarding free range versus organic. Have Jane and Liz answered that already, Sue Barnard? Or did you want to expand on that?
Yes, hang on. Yeah, I was interrupted a bit. So really, when we're talking about chickens and eggs, do we go for organic? Do we go for free range? What's the choice? What's better?
Organic, without a doubt. Whether it meat or eggs, the birds will have a better quality of life. They will have better quality food, and they will have a better quality of life. It's a really tiny percentage of the market at the moment. And, it's a huge ask on people, but without doubt, organic offers the best environment and feed for both laying hens and meat birds.
Just one quick question. You said that the eggs going into catering, etc., has really dropped, which was a good thing. But with catering going back, presumably those sales will go up again.
Potentially, yes.
There's not a change of heart.
No, I don't think so. I think it's more that people are going into supermarkets and obviously doing more home cooking from scratch. Therefore, that's increasing the free range sector, which is fantastic. But at the same time, obviously, the volumes have to come from somewhere, and the colony sector is crashing at the moment. It's absolutely crashing. Having also said that, free food processors, more and more of them are keen to switch to free range eggs. So I have to say, the colony sector is looking dodgy at the moment. It's not going. It's on a downward trend, which I'm pleased about.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks for your help.
So I'm going to, while we're sort of talking about how chickens are raised, hens are raised, we'll stay on that for the moment. There are a few other things that have come up, but so we're not sort of jumping back and forth. I'm trying to keep it in some sort of order in that respect. So there was a question regarding from Carolyn actually about keeping, obviously at the moment because of avian flu, we've got to keep the hens inside. So how long, I think Carolyn, if I'm not expressing this correctly, how long have we got to keep them inside before they can no longer be called free range?
Yeah, I just put a link in the chat box about that.
Okay.
Actually, that comes from Farmers Weekly Interactive, and that's the best explanation. They have a 12-week derogation at the moment, and if it goes to 16 weeks, then they're going to have to put labelling to show why their hens are higher welfare. We are hoping this will be over about the middle of April. I think that's the date I've got. Have you got anything different, Jane? Have you for housing?
No, 4th of April was what I had, yeah.
Yeah. So that's dependent on there not being any other outbreaks of flu, of course, which you get the flu at this time of year, partly because of the migratory birds moving around, but it just gets closer and closer. It starts off in sort of Asian countries, and it just does sort of mission creep really into Russia, into Europe, and it just creeps and creeps and creeps. And when it's in Holland, we all panic.
Fair enough. Then there was a question regarding the feed that you feed your eggs, and I think this is going to come on to yolks, the questions we've had about yolks. Hattie, this was from you regarding GM soya. Do you want to expand on that?
Yes, I just wondered, is it standard for the layers and also the broilers and the layers to have GM soya in the feed? And is there any way of avoiding that? I'm particularly interested in the amount of soy that comes from deforested, cleared land in South America.
I'm not 100% sure on the commercial scale. From a pet perspective, I know there's one feed in particular, which is a feed that we recommend by Smallholder range. Allen and Page is the company, and theirs is GM free. But I don't know on a commercial level, but we can get that information if that's something you're interested in.
I know it's a bit
get that information, but my guess is that because the excellent Allen and Page feed is sold at quite a premium, my guess is that commercial feed is soya of any.
Yeah, probably.
And that, as Jane said to begin with, if you want to be absolutely sure, buy organic, because they won't be allowed to use that in their feeds.
Thank you.
And still relating to feed, Katie was asking about scraps as in addition to feeding them pellets. Is that correct, Katie? Is that what you were? So is it okay to feed, if you're feeding your chickens layers pellets, should you feed them scraps?
No, not unless you're in a vegan household. Sorry, go on, Liz.
Yeah, I was going to say you're not allowed to feed any scraps out of your kitchen unless you're in a vegan household. Yes, there is a reason for this. The reason is that that they might have been near meat and therefore introduced diseases. We've already talked about avian flu. So that's the reasoning behind it, even though it does sound quite extreme.
How about if you know it hasn't, if it's literally like an apple core or not even apple core.
Under the legislation, nothing out of your kitchen.
Wow. Okay.
That's up to you but nothing out of your kitchen in case it's been contaminated. Am I right, Jane?
Yeah, you are right. Yeah.
Ruth, you had a question about pasteurized eggs or something you want to say about pasteurized eggs? Ruth Watson.
Yes, yeah. Hello, hi. Sorry, I'm clearing out the library, so I look like a train wreck. So I've blanked myself out. I just thought everyone should know, because we had this problem at the Crown and Castle. We were using free-range eggs from Havenfield Eggs, Happy Hens, perfectly legitimate, very good eggs, lovely. And we had a food inspection. And the woman who came from the EHO from the council had recently been actually checking what are they called? Those, oh, for goodness sake, the hydraulic things in warehouses where you pick up, I've gone completely blank. You know what I mean? When they run around in a warehouse picking up stuff on pallets, you know, one of those.
Yes.
She knew nothing about food. I think she'd had about a month's training or something. So she came in and told us that we couldn't use these free range eggs. They were dangerous, they were bad, they were awful. We went absolutely apeshit because obviously we felt they were really, really good and we knew they were good. And the people who kept the flocks had their salmonella checks and the whole thing, and it was all completely kosher and lovely. And she said we had to use liquid pasteurized egg. And I went even more ballistic because it came from Holland and it came from battery hens. And I was so outraged that somebody who was supposed to be looking after the interests of, you know, customers, their health, the birds, everything about it should be so badly misinformed. So I'm sorry I've had a bit of a rant. You can see I'm as cross now as I was then. But, you know, you have to watch these people because what's said is not necessarily what is right.
Thanks, Ruth. Is there anything you ladies like to add to that?
Well, that would have made a great story for the smallholder. I'd love to have that.
Yeah.
And I guess
Yeah.
Jane will follow that up.
Yeah.
won't
Okay,
Yeah, I
I'll,
think
send it to you. I'll write it up and send it to you.
yeah.
Kristen just had a quick question regarding mealworms. Kristen, did you want to explain? You're on mute, my love. You need to.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, in America, whenever we go back to our little house in Connecticut, we borrow a neighbor's chicken for the duration of our visit because we have a gorgeous, like, empty hen house. And we were encouraged to buy these things called mealworms, and they came in a plastic jar. Is that okay?
They are if they're fresh, but not if they're dry, not if they're desiccated.
They were desiccated. Is that so? That's bad.
I'm not sure what they would be like in America, but I know over here again that you're not allowed to feed desiccated mealworms to domestic poultry. They're only intended for wild birds.
They wouldn't
Yeah,
hurt
there
us.
are some
Wow,
very.
okay.
It's not a question of whether they'd hurt your chickens. Your chickens would probably love them.
Yeah, they would.
Your chickens would love a carcass with meat on it, but you're absolutely not allowed to feed that. Your free-range chickens will gulp down a mouse, much to your shock, if they see one.
Interesting. That's very interesting because our chicken just runs around the grounds of our house, like just eating all day long, as far as I could, like scratching. And she does this little dance where she goes scratch, and then she reveals something that she eats, and she's so happy all day long.
Yeah.
But then she spends the night in her little house. And I did give, I suppose it's like giving them Doritos or something. I feel so guilty now.
It is, yeah, and they will love them. They love them. Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't think it's against the law in America, but I guess I never thought about it. So I don't know. And we ate her eggs. So.
Whether it'll stay, because it was an EU law actually that was brought in. So whether that will get changed, I don't know. But I think you'll find that, you know, there are like with the scraps, people have their own take on these things.
Yeah.
Well, the next time we've got our chicken, I guess I've got to find out what sort of laws I've been breaking, you know, like criminal, I don't know. But because I did give her like cabbage leaves, and we're not vegetarian or vegan household. So I've been doing all sorts of dangerous outlaw things.
I wouldn't get too upset about it, Kristen. I don't think they've got enough people to come out and check on us all who are sort of giving our hens bits and pieces. So I would, you know, but you know, on the record, we have to say the law,
Okay.
and that is the law. So, but you know, I wouldn't lose sleep over it.
Check American laws. I just don't know.
Mealworms, my hens have happily been them.
Couldn't Kristen give her some organic corn instead for her? I when I go and give the hens a handful of corn at night, because you know, as you know, it's not got much nutrient in it, although it helps the colour of the yolks. And I always say I'm giving them their Maltesers.
Yes. Yeah, but they love it. They love all of that.
I certainly could do that. I've just not. I've been very lax about looking up what's good for her. I just thought, I don't know.
Have a look at our website. We've got lots of tips on treats. I mean, I give mine. I have food which I keep out in my hen house. And so mine will have tinned sweet corn, and they'll have something like cornflakes. But I'm very specific about each hen will only have at maximum 2 teaspoons of treat a day, because as Liz said very early on, these birds do need a balanced diet. So if you mess up their balanced diet, they won't produce eggs. I've got 9 hens that can lay at the moment, bearing in mind I've got spent hens. And on Saturday, I had 7 eggs. I think I've had 5 and a 4, and yesterday I had 3. Today I know I've already at least got 3. So these birds will carry on working, but you do have to put good stuff in.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with you. I think that the fact that we have just the one, it's as bad as my only human child. She gets everything. So I'm gonna have to be much more disciplined now. I can see that.
We have had a couple of questions actually from various members about yolks and what's the best things to feed them to get really yellow yolks. Why are yolks different in some countries like Italy? Do you have this? And why we don't see double yolk as much these days? Although I have to say, if you keep your own, I think I have when mine were young, when we first got them, they did seem to lay double yolks, and it says it bears no relevance to the size of the egg. I have to hasten to add, you could crack an egg that seems quite small and have a double yolk, but that's, I think maybe in shops you don't get them so much. I don't know.
I don't know. I very rarely get a double yolker. Mine rarely do one. But yeah.
It's a defect in theory, a double yolker.
Yeah.
It's actually the industry doesn't like it because it's a defect, and you tend to get them more amongst purebreds, I think, than you do the hybrids. But,
I think mine are just
they are quite thrilling when you get them, aren't they?
But what do you feed them to get brilliant yellow yolks? Does it matter?
The yolk colour comes from what goes into the feed or what the hen naturally picks up. So, for example, I feed mine the Allen and Page mixed corn, and within that is cupped maize, which is like dried sweet corn. So I always know which hens have eaten lots of that cupped maize because their legs go yellow. That makes their legs go yellow, and therefore that will make their egg yolk a richer colour. Typically the commercial feed companies will, I'm talking for the backyard hen keeper, will put marigold petals in, and that will give the yolks a nice sort of orangey colour. It's a bit like the salmon industry, really, where they get a paint chart to sort of what colour do you want your salmon to be, which is quite awful, really. But with egg yolks, again, you can really influence it by what you put into the hen itself.
Lovely. I've just asked if you could put type the brand namings. There's a few of us that do keep chickens. I think we'd be interested in that.
Yeah, Allen and Page. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I don't know how to do that on the thing.
It's just in the chat. If you
yeah, I've got it
up at the end. That'd be. Sorry, we've been moving around with the questions because I was trying to keep them in sort of groups. Why are white eggs cheaper? I like that question actually, because that is something Jenny Ridgewell has raised, and that's something I've often wondered myself. White eggs, is there a reason why they're cheaper?
Because people like brown eggs, and originally the laying hen in this country came from the Mediterranean breeds who all lay white eggs. That is what Mediterranean hens have floppy combs, and they lay white eggs, and they were very much the basis. They were very much the ones that were laying the eggs. So I think they were quite common up until, I'm not sure, Jane, but I'm pretty sure that I was of the age where we had white eggs and then it swapped over.
It did swap over. It swapped over because we all suddenly were told that brown eggs were healthier for us. And it was purely a marketing drive. And ironically, it was Delia Smith. It was another classic of Delia's when she put the white eggs on one of her cookery books, that the interest in white eggs rocketed. And the industry at the moment is just beginning to switch back over to white eggs because the birds, typical sort of shavers, and there's another couple of hybrids, are less aggressive than the brown birds. I mean, this is when you're keeping them in huge flocks. So, you need to breed in docility into the birds. The white eggs, again, it's just used from a marketing point of view. One of the major brands, I've got a feeling it's Noble and the Happy Egg Company, but a couple of them do it, bring out at Christmas what they call snow eggs, Well, it's just white eggs. So, you know, we're so easily led as consumers, but it sounds nice at Christmas. And of course, what's inside the egg is exactly the same. There's no bearing on the colour of the shell. What has a bearing on the colour of the shell is the colour of the hen's earlobes. If they're white earlobes, she'll lay a white egg. If they're pink, she'll lay a brown egg.
What
And
about
you're quite
pink
right,
eggs,
I never
sort
thought
of
that, but all the
flesh-coloured eggs?
Mediterranean
Where do
breeds
they?
have white earlobes.
What, sorry, Liz?
You're quite right. All the Mediterranean breeds have big white earlobes, and
Yeah.
they do have those floppy combs, which you can see in some hybrids, can't you?
Yes. Yes. Well, the reason they have the big floppy combs is because when you've got birds in a, you know, you could have tens of thousands of hens within one unit in stacks of cages that go right up to the ceiling. So you can imagine the heat they generate. They've got a much higher body temperature than us chickens. So one of the ways that they dissipate the heat is by actually growing this enormous fleshy comb, and that just helps them keep cool. It's a big issue for the industry. When we have a really hot summer, the first thing I think about is all the poor birds in the caged environments. They do have, obviously they have got ventilation, but you know, things go wrong. Yeah, it's not particularly good for the birds, that's for sure.
But why are they selling white eggs for a less price at the moment? I asked in my local food market. She said, "Do they cost less?" They're not the ones, the battery ones. They're the free range ones.
It's just purely because probably, I'm only guessing on this actually, but I would probably say because people have the perception that white are not as healthy as brown. It's bonkers. There's no difference.
Why do people keep hens that lay white eggs?
Because they are in a commercial environment, they're less aggressive. If you can imagine, if you've got a flock of 10,000, or say you've got a flock of 16,000 free range hens, if you have, you know, that's not natural. It's like any animal. Ordinarily in the jungle fowl situation, their max flock size would be about 80, and even that's big. So what we're doing is, because we need it on a commercial basis to keep the egg price cheap, we're putting birds into a forced environment, if you like. That's why they do beak tipping still, because you only need one bird to start a bad practice, and very quickly you've got bad behavior through the entire flock, which can lead to something as extreme as cannibalism. Believe you me, that's not what they want. So that's, you know, that's why they still beak tip. They don't do it for any other reason. And, you know, I get quite frustrated with some sort of welfare organisations that try to blame the farmers for beak tipping. They do it because it's for the birds' welfare. And if we were able to keep birds in flocks of 80 and keep them all nice and happy in little orchards so that they were, you know, living their most natural life, you'd probably be paying about £3 for half a dozen eggs, and people won't do it. So, you know, there has to be compromise. And, you know, I put my head above the parapet when it came to beak tipping, because I was very much in favour, and I still am, of the industry continuing to beak tip until such time as they have genetically built in enough docility that they don't need to beat it, or we've switched across to more white birds. If we had more white flocks laying white eggs, we would have less of an issue with aggression in flocks.
So,
you know,
can I ask just another further question? I'm looking at the 70s. In the 70s, I didn't teach chicken to school children. It was too expensive. What happened?
Sorry, you didn't teach? You didn't?
Chicken was not in the textbooks.
Cooking chicken, right? Not
Cooking chicken. It was not. It's not listed. Right. So what happened in the 70s to change things?
The hybrid hen happened. The hybrid meat bird happened. That's what happened, because prior to that, you would have to, a cockerel would take several, you know, quite a long time to grow on, and wouldn't produce a great deal of meat. That is more expensive. But when the hybrid meat bird happened, when it was really taken up, you could produce much more meat in much shorter time with much less feed, and then it became available to all.
And what type of chicken was that? What type of bird was that?
Well, it's a hybrid. So that the poultry industry have bred it to be a rapid grower, really be able to metabolize feed and not to have too much feed, and be ready to eat with a heavy breast in about 6 to 7 weeks.
Thank you.
And while we're on the subject of chickens, Liz, Julie, you had a question, didn't you, regarding flavour in chicken? Or is that flavour in eggs particularly?
No, it's flavour in chicken. 30 years ago, I was invited to lunch with the Kennards, Bob and Carolyn, who run Greg Farm on the Welsh borders. And as I drove up the drive, there was this amazing smell of roast chicken. I can't tell you how wonderful it was. And Bob's story was really interesting. He had, after university, he'd gone to Africa to work for a gap year and stayed for 6 or 7 years working on a smallholding. And when he came back to Britain, he said that the flavour had gone out of chicken, just like that, while he'd been away. Yeah. And so he thought he would look into it. So he did the breed and feed thing. He tried every possible kind of coronation. What's the word I want? Anyway, he tried. He experimented with everything he possibly could. And in the end, he surmised that it was all in the hanging of the birds. That before he went away, birds were hung, probably, I would have thought, with their guts in, as you hang fowl or game. And by the time he came back, the birds were slaughtered and sold immediately. And he said it was that flavour that we were really missing. And I wondered if there was other thoughts on that.
I'm not one to talk on the broilers because I don't know enough about them.
Liz, do you have any views?
Yeah, that would not be at all something that the modern poultry industry could do. They need to get these birds through, and I mean, we could get quite controversial about this, and I think we could say that for many people, white chicken is something to carry another flavour. You might as well use corn. You might as well use anything, because it's going to carry garlic sauce, whatever. It's not, people are not regarding white chicken, I don't think, as a meat that much, really. It's just as something to put other things with. When it comes down to producing flavoursome chickens, we've raised broilers ourselves, and I can't say that I find the flavour particularly bland. It's been pretty good. If you were going to use one of the old style utility purebreds and hang it, yeah, that would work, I'm sure. It would be a bit of a niche thing, though. I think there's probably some money waiting for somebody who develops that side of things, but it I think.
Linda, you had a question regarding vaccinating chickens. You with us still, Linda?
Well, that's an interesting one. One for Jane.
Free range. Sorry, I was muted. Whether it's free range or organic, is it the law to have them vaccinated against salmonella? And also an extra thing is, do organic and free range farmers move their livestock around a field so they don't get disease from filthy earth? Maybe they grow vegetables on it afterwards, I don't know, and move them around. Anyway, there's two questions.
Okay, I'm not certain on the second of those, I'm afraid, because I don't have enough information on sort of specific farms, but my guess would be that some do. They definitely have to give enough time to refresh the ground. It gets what they call poached, which is just gets foul, essentially. So it's in the farmer's interests to keep the ground sort of good quality for the birds. Regarding salmonella, that was a big scandal, wasn't it, back in the 80s with what was her name? Edwina, yes. So she caused absolute devastation within the egg-laying industry overnight. But as a result of that, the UK has one of the best records on salmonella. And yes, they do all get vaccinated against salmonella. It's not lifelong, but it certainly is. It's good enough for the life of the cycle, and actually, very often will go on.
I understood it was just the Lion brand stamped ones that were. I mean, if you're selling your farm eggs, you know, at the end of your driveway, do you have to have the salmonella?
No, you don't. No, if you've got a
label.
flock bigger than 50, if you've got more than 50 birds in your flock, you have to
50.
be registered.
Right.
So 50. So for example, I've only got a dozen birds, so I don't have to register. Of course, my birds are ex-commercial birds, so will have had the salmonella vaccination. But if you've got pure breed birds and you're selling eggs, it's not. I don't think it's a law. Liz, you'll know more on that one for
No,
the salmonella.
Selling eggs, it doesn't really matter how many birds you've got if you don't grade them and if you're selling them at a farm gate. Once you start grading them or putting them into a shop, then all the law kicks in.
Yeah. But I think you'll find it's not just Lion brand, it's right across the board that everybody has to have the salmonella vaccination.
Right. I see Ruth's answered something.
Yeah.
Yeah. All free range commercial flocks. Yeah. And they have it every few months. My God. Ooh, that's a bit much.
Charlotte.
Well, it does mean that they can use raw eggs. People can use raw eggs with imperfect safety. That's the point of it, really.
Ah, yeah.
Charlotte,
thank you.
Regarding accommodation for hens, if you're looking to get hens as a newbie, is that correct, Charlotte? Was there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, it was. I know that you haven't touched on that so much for the session, but I'd love to know if you have any recommendations for that as a complete novice.
What you're looking to get some hens, and you're looking at accommodation for them.
Yeah, if you have any recommendations of anything that you know.
I would say you've got a couple of decisions to make, really. Do you want sort of wood, which is most people find aesthetically more pleasing, or do you want sort of plastic, which from a practicality point of view is a lot easier to keep clean? So, you know, one of the bed bugs with chickens is something called red mites. It's a bit like dogs and cats having fleas. So it's something that comes with the hot weather. If you've got a plastic hen house, which I have to say I'm not a fan of, so I don't have one, you can literally just take the thing apart and blast it with a hose. You can't do that with a wooden house. But there are all sorts of ways that you can keep on top of something like red mite with a wooden house. The second point I'd make is if you're looking to adopt, you know, we always say our hens are roughly the size of a football. So if you're buying a hen house and you want to adopt 4 chickens, buy one that says it's for at least 6 chickens, because as Liz said, I think earlier, they always skimp a little bit on what they think will fit into your house. The bigger you go, the better, because if you do start adopting or taking on hens, it's very, very addictive. And, you know, whereas about 50% of the people that come to us and adopt are new to hen keeping. And, you know, the thing I really like about it is actually that also encourages people to then go into the pure breed sector as well. So it's everybody wins. There is a real nice sort of spread. Introducing hen keeping as a hobby is the main sort of thing. So yeah, it's if you haven't done it, it's nothing nicer than walking down the garden and picking up your eggs.
Yes, I that's really interesting, because I think we might potentially build something from wood, because I'm too mean to pay the prices I've seen for the wooden hen houses at the country stores. But Sam Belton, you've got an egg loo, haven't you?
I have, and I'm just a bit perturbed. And I've just seen Ruth's comment about
What's Ruth said?
About getting red mite, and that I haven't had a problem with red mites. But I would agree with what Jane says. I've got an egg loo. I've currently got 3 chickens. We used to have 4. This is our second batch of chickens. They all died of natural causes. I'm pleased to report they weren't eaten by a fox. But I would say, it says when we bought it, it said it could accommodate 6. There's not a chance. 4's pushing it. I think 3 is nice for it. But if I can send you a picture, Charlotte, later if you want to see the size of mine. But yeah, they're much easier to keep clean. They're not quite as pretty as a wooden house, admittedly. I do actually have a question following on actually from Linda. I have my chickens in an enclosed fruit cage. The fruit cage was built to protect the fruit from the squirrels, but it doubles up as a nice run for the hens as well. But I don't move them. I'm now worried, should I be moving them? I don't know that I'd be able to get the egg loo out, but so that's another issue. But do I move them?
No, you don't have to. It depends on what the quality of the ground is that they're on. If it's getting a bit yucky, it's probably a good thing to move them. You know, I'm lucky in as much as I've got a big enough space for my 12 hens that they might create a little muddy area immediately outside the house and by the gate where I walk in, but the rest of it is really nice. So it's not an issue. But if you've got a relatively small space for your hens, then the whole area gets poached, then potentially you're better off trying to move them. The other thing is that, you know, I go in with a pair of rubber gloves, takes me about 5 minutes every day, and I de-poop. And, you know, if you can de-poop on a daily basis, then you're also sort of stopping it from getting yucky and poached. So it depends on your setup.
Interestingly, we are probably one of the first generations, or the second generation, probably first, second generation, that actually do keep hens all the time, because back in the market gardening days, it would be all in, all out, grass limed. The house would be sprayed with something completely fatal that's probably banned now. You'd leave it all and you'd move them onto a new piece of ground, put them back in the house. But we changed that these days, and we're keeping them all year round, every year. So that's why we've had a build up of red mite and everything else. So yeah, as Jane said, you have to really, there's no one rule. You have to look and make up your mind. Going back to Charlotte's question, don't discount buildings that you've got. If you've got a well-built shed, you can turn that into a hen house. If you've got a brick outbuilding, you know, hen houses, I think sometimes with the marketing, it's got to be this pointy thing with egg boxes in it. No, it's got to be something that's very secure from foxes, that will keep them safe, that's big enough, got perches, and the laying area needs to be in the dark, or you need to have some sacks or something so that they are in the dark, otherwise you'll get egg eating. But you can convert buildings to nice places, and sometimes they're bigger.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Sue, did you want to ask a question about the size of eggs? Or has that been answered already?
Yes. No. Apologies. I'm trying to deal with a visit as well as talking online. I was just I missed the bit about mixed size eggs. I thought at the end of this, small eggs, organic eggs, but the mixed sizing, can you just clarify what that was all about, whether I should be going for mixed sizing or small?
Mixed is fine. Mixed or small, either is good, to be perfectly honest. So, you know, the mixed weight eggs, you're just allowing the farmer to sell the eggs that his hens are laying without devaluing the small size eggs. If you buy small eggs, you are really supporting the farmer and really helping the hen. So either or are good, really good options, but avoid, I think it's more important to say, avoid extra large, avoid large, even, you know, the mediums. But, you know, medium, small, mixed weight would be incredibly helpful to the industry and to the hens.
Right, shall do that.
Going back to chicken keeping again now, hen keeping, Alison had a question regarding the size of a run. Alison, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Basically, we have foxes. One of the neighbours encourages the foxes and feeds them and so on. And I was just obviously, you know, very concerned about what would happen to the chickens with the foxes around. So I assumed I would have to sort of build a huge run sort of out of metal that the foxes couldn't get through. And I was wondering what size that would need to be, please. Shoot the neighbour.
Ruth's got the solution there. Shoot the neighbour. I agree.
Oh no, I like foxes. I encourage my readers not you know, to work with foxes. They're dropping numbers. But the short answer to that is as large as you can possibly make it, I think. Because what really distresses me is when you see the hen houses with their built-in runs, they're really only good for just keeping them in when you're not around or something like that. If you're going to be, I've seen some beautiful setups with different levels, things for the hens to get into, some potted trees. That's the sort of thing you want to aim for. So however many birds you've got, however many you want to have, it needs to be as large as you can make it.
Okay, thank you.
I know that's not exactly, that doesn't tell you, but if you've got 4 birds, I would say you'd need to have at least a 12-meter tight run if they're going to be in there all the time.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I was just going to say, Liz, to pick up on what you said, talking from my own experience. When we first got the chickens, we used to let them roam the garden, which sounds lovely, but they literally will eat anything. And they poo, an awful lot of poo comes out of one chicken. They're lovely beasts, don't get me wrong, I love my chickens, but they are, they can poo for England and some. So it's better if you can, if you don't want them pooing all over your patio, keep them in a big run.
I think you could have a shrub. I think you could have a shrub garden. I think you get away with shrubs, but you anything tender, anything that comes up nicely when you scratch, maybe not.
Mine found their way into the veg garden, which was fatal. It's now they just have to look at the veg garden from the enclosed fruit cage. So they're
You could let them in there. You could let them in there when you want it, sort of when you want the bugs removed and it dug out in the autumn, perhaps.
Yeah, but we're a bit like Alison. We have the same problem with foxes even during the day. So that's the other thing.
You just have to accept there are foxes. They are territorial. If you shoot them, then one's going to come in anyway. If you trap them, that's just bloody cruel, really. You just have to learn to coexist, I think. Otherwise, it's going to be misery.
Catty wants to know if chicken poo is good manure.
I think it needs to be composted first. Isn't that right, Liz?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very strong stuff. It's good stuff.
It is good stuff. It's excellent stuff. In fact, they sell it, don't they, Jane? Isn't there something?
Yes. Oh, yes. You can get it in. You can get it in garden centres, can't you? Yeah. But it's all composted. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions? I'm aware that we're sort of now up to the time. We can keep on for a little bit if you have any burning questions you want to ask. If not, I can certainly. Jane and Liz, are you happy for me to give your email addresses out?
Yes, please. Yeah, I'm just, the only thing I'd want to say is I really, really hope that anybody listening can help with the large egg sort of scenario. It would make such a difference if we started, filtering that out there into the wider audiences. It would make such a difference. So yeah, that would be my sort of end comment, really. But thanks so much for the opportunity for this. It's been brilliant.
Thank you for coming and chatting to us today.
And my end comment would be, please don't use the word capon. Please acknowledge what they are. They're hybrids. I mean, you don't have to put that in, but please be aware that there's no such thing as a capon. And, with the cockerels too, be aware these are meat poultry, not of both sexes. I was going to give you I forgot actually, you're very lucky I forgot. I was going to give you an entire sort of lecture about the mating habits of chickens and ducks. Chickens do not have penises, it's all inside them. Ducks, however, do have penises, interestingly enough. And my other thing would be, and I can see none of you do this, but never have too many cockerels, and certainly not too many drakes to the poor unfortunate females. Always, keep that to a minimum, really.
Well, I definitely think I think we could probably do another session on eggs alone, sure. And I think would definitely be interest in doing something on other forms of poultry like ducks and maybe turkeys, maybe a bit later in the year, Liz, if you're happy to do that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, let's make it up. Let's make it a day it rains. I'll have to put a sheet up. I hadn't realised how light it was.
I'm glad the sun's shining somewhere. Yes. It's a bit overcast here in Sussex, so it's nice to see that the sun is shining somewhere in the UK. Right, so I'm going to bring this to a close if that's okay. So there are comments coming in thick and fast. If I've missed a question, Amy, do you have a question? Sorry. No, okay. If you have got a question,
I'm saying bye.
Bye. Okay, sorry, Amy. I just. I'm happy to bring this to a close and say thank you again to Liz and Jane for joining us today and for such an informative session. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you all soon. Those of you.
Charlotte,
Yes.
sorry. Can we do something in the guild about this thing about not writing recipes, staying large eggs? Now we all know. I think we should have an initiative, don't you?
I think this is a fascinating point that, you know, a lot of us aren't necessarily aware of it. So the layperson probably isn't going to be. So let's pick up that conversation. And we've missed the newsletter dedeadline, but we'll have a think about how we can communicate the information. Thank you all so much.
Thank
you.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right, what I will do is I will save the